Hi, this is the Whodunnit podcast, where we ask the all-important question behind every murder. Who actually did it? And I'm Aidan, and today I'm with...
Sophie, hi.
And we're going to be talking about one of the most famous unsolved murders in the history of the UK. Jack the Ripper. Actually, probably the most famous unsolved murder that there is.
Yeah, there's it still is museums in London and stuff like that. It's a very, almost like a dark twisted fairy tale. Very.
Yeah, no, the British public have been enraptured with this for over 120 years at this point.
Yeah,
it's
crazy.
insane.
It's part of British culture now.
Yeah, it's almost ingrained into us from when we were young. There's the boogeyman, then there's Jack the Ripper.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, literally. There's folk that claim to be copycats and all this stuff, and it still is unsolved technically.
It's shocking how much his legacy has persevered,
Mm-hmm.
even through all the other horrible serial murders that we've had in this country.
Yeah, it sort of started in 1888. The first ever body that was found was August 31st, and it was just a regular policeman was sort of just walking his beat, and then he finds the first body, and gory, I know, but her throat was cut and she was disemboweled. This sort of it kept on going with even it getting to the point where there was 2 people murdered in the same night, and police were baffled by this. They had no idea who was doing it, and it always was in the Whitechapel area, and his targets always sort of seemed to be women who would go out and try and get money because they were maybe weren't as well off and stuff like that. And then he was coined Jack the Ripper. Well, he might have labelled himself Jack the Ripper, or somebody else did, with a very famous letter that was sent after the murders.
Yeah, there's also this almost unbelievable level of depravity that he shows in every single act that he commits. Even the letters obviously taunting the police, it's a cruel and horrible, and I'm sure, did he not send them body parts?
Yeah, it ended up being, though, to this day it's still not confirmed if that was actually him. Because it was such a public case, you got a lot of people pretending to be him.
Yeah, looking for their own 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was definitely a mistake that they made, making it that public. But it couldn't not be. It was in such a public place. Whitechapel around that time was just packed with people who weren't as well off. It was very much a place of poverty, and it was just so everybody knew everybody. Yeah. So everybody knew about this.
So he took advantage of that, and he went and killed the people who may have been seen as less well off or less looked after.
Yeah, it was definitely it seemed targeted somehow. These were women who would go out and would use their body as a means to make money, and it was just so they could buy somewhere to sleep that night. It was
of course.
And it was the same type of women every single time.
I'm sure that we'll circle back to his choice of victim as a source of motivation later on, but for now, I just kind of want to go through what we're going to talk about in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Our real big questions are, who were the leading suspects to be Jack the Ripper? Because we don't know. Let's be quite upfront, but we have some pretty good guesses, educated guesses, as to why and who those people were. Even though it is the big question. It is the one on everybody's mind to this day. Another one is, why is his crime spree in particular gone on as something almost mythic in British history? I mean, it's not the biggest serial killing spree that we've had in this country, and it's certainly not the most... It might be the most depraved, but it's certainly not the largest, so I have to wonder what was it that made this stand out in particular. And of course, we have to look into what's the leading belief as to why he did it. Because this man, he was never discovered. We never got the opportunity to ask him his motivation or anything of the sort, you know?
I mean, you can sort of look at the suspects. There was sort of you had your main suspects. That it's still not confirmed if they did it, but if you had to guess, it'd probably be them. First one that you've sort of got is Karl Feigenbaum, and he was a German sailor who was actually executed in 1894 for murdering a woman in New York.
Jesus, I mean, you're already going into the pit like a murderer, and already a murderer, and now we're trying to put the Jack the Ripper murders on him as well. It's like,
Yeah.
it makes sense because to commit such serial killings, it would make sense that you'd done it before. Just have a few questions, obviously, about Carl Feigenbaum because I'm sure that he's obviously a right nasty person. Well, he's a murderer.
Yeah.
So, how could he have committed the murders if he was in New York?
Well, at the time of the murders, he had ported his ship at Whitechapel on every single day that the 5 Ripper murders took place. And then he later became a suspect. It sort of raised alarms when his the woman that he murdered was called Juliana Hoffman. And when her body was found, it was strikingly similar to the state that all of the Ripper victims were found in, with the cut throats and all that.
Of course, it's very suspicious that he doesn't have an alibi. In fact, it is the opposite of an alibi. He's something that puts him there when it happened.
Yeah, he his own defense lawyer believed that he was the Ripper, and then his lawyer then went on to state that himself actually admitted to the murders and that he did not have an alibi. But also, you could just say a lot of the time, people who kill other people look for attention and would like the recognition of doing that, sort of just claiming something as their own. So
I mean, he had nothing to lose, didn't he? If he was already going away on death row for what he did to that poor woman, then to admit to the murders would be nothing to him because he was already dead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like if he was the Ripper, if this is true, then he would have received the same punishment because you can't get any worse than death.
No.
Death's like the big punishment, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't think you could do any worse to him than that.
No.
So, I suppose in a way, if he is the Ripper, even though he didn't get exposed for it, he did get what he deserved.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it as if he was looking for sort of a little bit more fame as a way to a final way to be have his name solidified in history, but also, I don't know, the fact that he was there the same 5 days that the murders took place over those years, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, of course. I think that, I mean, if he was telling the truth, then it does mean that we've spent about 130 years looking in the dark when there was an obvious candidate right there.
Right there.
And I hate to think, this is obviously, I might a smaller thing, but I hate to think of the time people have wasted in search of this killer.
I think maybe in some sort of weird way, people don't really want him to be revealed. Don't they like the mystery of it? It makes it much more exciting and interesting to hear about, and it gives us a sort of I don't know, it's in, just rooted really deep in our history. Possible witness of the Ripper, somebody who saw one of the victims, said that she was talking to a man that had an accent who seemed foreign. So I mean that could also tie into the German sailor.
Of course. What we have to look at as well is that the Ripper is almost certainly the most famous because obviously we'll circle back to this, but it's the mystery that attracts people. Mm-hmm. It's not the actual acts themselves, because there's a lot. Of course, I don't mean to get too morbid, but there are people that have done worse.
Yeah.
You know?
No, definitely. I think it's interesting why this one became so prominent.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'll go into the second suspect now, and I think we'll be surprised at this one. Prince Albert, who was the son of Queen Victoria. It's quite a story, this, to be honest with you. Okay. I don't know if I believe it personally, but it has been put forward over the years. Now, to set the scene a bit here, Albert he died young. He died at 29 of syphilis. Obviously, that's not a good way to be for any person, dying that young.
No.
So there is this case that he was frustrated, angry, maybe he lashed out. Mm-hmm. But he was not considered a suspect in the 1800s. That was not something that was brought up or even suggested, which is fair enough, because I think if you look into royalty, there's not going to be good consequences for that, certainly.
No, definitely not.
So this came out in 1970. British physician Thomas Toll published an article that suggested that Albert had committed these murders. No matter how shocking that may be, because of a fit-in of insanity brought on by his advanced case of syphilis.
Wow. So like almost 100 years later,
Yeah,
they brought it up.
I know it's like, I feel like it's difficult not to think that he was obviously looking for attention in saying this,
Yeah.
because let's be completely honest with ourselves. He probably didn't do it.
No,
You know.
there's like, I don't know, there's like illness, and then there's just being far-fetched and looking for a story. I
Yeah,
feel like.
exactly. And like, I don't think, obviously he was the physician, but I don't think it's possible to have committed such a string of murders based purely on insanity.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that like the Ripper was very like hidden. Nobody saw his face and stuff like that. But how hidden can you be when you're Queen Victoria's son?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you would think somebody would have spotted him,
Yeah.
or even just like, I don't know, clocked in their head that he wasn't where he was supposed to be. Because like people like that are constantly sort of like, somebody knows where they are at all times. And
Yeah.
I don't know what it was like then, but at least now.
Oh yeah,
very much
I think
like
it was
that.
even. I think it would be even more back then, because
Mhm.
royalty had power back then.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I mean, it could go down a rabbit hole for another day, but they don't have as much power now as they did back then. So
No.
I imagine the scrutiny on them then was even worse than it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I would say, I will preface this. Obviously, we've talked about how it's probably not true, but this version of events is very prone to scrutiny from basically every major source in the book, with
Mhm.
official reports and papers basically saying that he couldn't have been there, he wasn't there, and that it's kind of stupid to say that he would have been. But it's always interesting to look into.
Yeah, so like, I don't know. It's just it doesn't add up in my head that like all that proof is there that it wasn't him, and he's still technically considered a suspect.
Yeah,
I'm just
well,
not buying it.
what I'd say is there are people about still that propagate this theory, that build it up and say, "Oh, Albert, we do believe that he did it," even if it
Mhm.
doesn't make sense in my head, but to these newer sleuths out there, it does.
I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know. It seems a bit like, oh, how exciting would it be if our like royalty was this like who like did this crazy like horrible thing. I don't know. It seems like it's sort of like one big conspiracy theory for or like entertainment purposes.
I think.
Because that's quite a story.
I think. I'll be honest. I'm slightly disgusted by the idea that people would want, like, a specific person that was already like plagued with tragedy
Yeah.
to be a serial murderer.
Yeah.
You know, even though I have very little, like personally, I have very little sympathy for royalty or whatever.
Mhm.
He died of syphilis. It's not a good death, you know.
Yeah. No. Definitely
And he's
not.
been slandered even further after
Uh-huh.
death. But at the same time, anything's possible. There's certain stuff that's happened in this world that like you wouldn't believe
Mhm.
if you didn't have the facts.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. There's also, though, a third suspect who is sort of believed in modern times to be the most likely candidate, and that is a man called Robert Mann. He was an attendant at the Whitechapel mortuary, where all the victims were examined, and they also tell of the fact that the Ripper was believed to have had knowledge of anatomy by the way he mutilated his victims, and Mann sort of fit the description.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that to have been that precise, you would have had to have known like at least where obviously everybody knows where the major organs are, but like you'd have to be very specific.
Yeah, I mean it's getting into quite like gruesome territories now. But one of the victim, multiple of them actually had like their like whole womb removed.
Yeah.
And personally, I don't really know. I wouldn't know where to even like point that out. Like I like the area, but like doing that, I don't know. It just seems very. You have
Yeah.
knowledge of how to do it. You know, like
Yeah.
it's very somebody with experience, like which then leads you to believe somebody who worked in a morgue or somebody who was a doctor or like that sort of thing.
Yeah, somebody that could be that surgically kind of like precise with it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it wasn't neatly done, but it was very like, and there was also, I'm pretty sure it was like there was like kidneys removed and that sort of stuff, like the one that was sent in a letter to someone. Like it's very just, I don't know. You would think it would be someone with that sort of knowledge.
Well, yeah, would you say that he would kind of fit the description of what a potential murderer could have been?
Yeah, definitely. But he wasn't actually a suspect at the time, interestingly. He was only first suggested as a suspect in 2009 by a British historian who also put forward that he fit the background of that like modern sort of criminologists believe the Ripper to have had. And he also had a very difficult upbringing with very little in the way of wealth. Like he was very just not well off at all. And then with all that, when you look at sort of psychologically now criminals and what they sort of would look for in a serial killer, like you would picture them having a rough upbringing or like somewhere that he fits all of them.
Yeah, you can kind of see why people would believe in that sort of a candidate as being worthy, like, well, not worthy, but like, that would fit the idea of being a killer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's this kind of trope in life even that it's just hurt people hurt more people. That's what they do.
Yeah, no,
And
definitely.
if he was hurt and like impacted as a young
Mhm.
child, maybe that did traumatise him, scar him, make him who he was.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, in some sort of like sick, twisted way, it's understandable. Not like you understand why, but you understand how they could have got to that point, especially with psychologists now, like just dissecting all of that.
What I would say is that it all seems a bit circumstantial. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Man, Albert, both of them just seem to be there. You know, it's
Yeah.
not even, and even in the case of Albert, he wasn't. He was in England, but he wasn't there. So what it kind of leads me to believe is, are people really just trying to stick it on someone that was around?
Yeah, I mean that's true. You could, with like the same way, you could just blame it on any doctor who lived in Whitechapel at that time, or anybody who had a rough childhood, which was a lot of people in Whitechapel. But also, the person who posed this idea was called May Trout, and she uses as a key piece of her evidence the fact that an inquest to the first Ripper murder revealed that Mann had unnecessarily undressed the victim while she was in the morgue, which Trout suggests was because Mann wanted to admire his own handiwork after committing the crime, which is interesting.
I mean, it's this always thing, you know, that they say of like, oh, murderers always return to the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
I think that is certainly more convincing than the others, I would say, beyond a doubt, because that's, you know, that's something that's sick, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's characteristic of our killer, yeah.
Yeah. No, it definitely could be seen like, I don't know, it like sort of admiring your own work, especially if Mann had done it, worked in a morgue. It was a good way to then revisit the victim, which is sometimes a lot of people do. Like in the murder, they'll revisit sort of the either the scene of the crime or the murder or take a trophy from it, and working in the morgue is a very good way to do that. Like the murders like this didn't happen, so it was very like, oh, I don't know, but
What I'd say is that while all three suspects had some kind of reason to be the killer, one of the things that keeps the Ripper myth like still intriguing to us all is that there's no reason to be like this guy, this one guy, he's the Ripper. There's no reason
Yeah.
to say that beyond a doubt.
yeah, I mean it's definitely a case that will probably stay unsolved. I can't imagine them revisiting a case this long ago, especially something that's so like again, like just embedded in our history. Like the fact that there's literally like museums in London about it. It sort of seems like the kind of thing that they'll just leave alone.
Yeah, of course.
Sort of like a scary like bedtime story.
Yeah, of course. And then we keep bringing the Reaper back into the culture. Like, there was a TV show about 15 years ago called Whitechapel,
Yeah.
which was quite overtly a recreation of the Jack Ripper murders in the modern viewpoint.
Yeah.
It was dramatised. It was quite frankly I've seen it myself. It's a good TV program, but it's not realistic, and it just further kind of spreads these rumours and theories that we don't know about the Ripper.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's something that keeps on getting revisited. It's very like Netflix as well. They have a whole unsolved like mysteries TV show, and they did a whole episode based on it. Like it's very, like it's still very relevant and talked about today.
Yeah. And what I'd say as well is that the Ripper was used a lot in Sherlock Holmes. He's like this kind of projected villain
Yeah.
figure, and those novels came from newspapers, which is quite ironic considering the fact that it was the newspapers that made Jack famous in the first place.
Yeah, interesting. It's very just like, yeah, it was. It was very publicized at the time.
Yeah, like at the time of the murder, there were so many like newspapers that were very eager to create these big articles, big sensationalist stories about the Ripper, including many that rang untrue and were just spreading misinformation and lies.
Yeah.
And the exploitation of the Ripper case to sell newspapers it's not over. You know, it's still going today with every new development that they bring up about the case as to, oh, who could have done it? Here's where he could have done it. It's always a big headline article
Yeah.
to sell newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, I remember even reading very briefly that there was a whole like second where they thought maybe somebody who worked at a journalistic like company did the murders because there was nothing to write about. So then they like made like news for themselves. I mean, that's also just quite far fetched.
Yeah, it's like shocking that they ignore the facts at hand.
Yeah.
I think we've got one more question that's to be answered is,
Okay.
why did they even do this?
Yeah, like the motivation. I don't know. It's sort of just like, well, his like victims were all sort of like the same sort of people. They were all prostitutes. The leading belief as to the motivation of carrying out these murders was sort of tied to an overly sadistic misogyny, which was committed like time and time and again to multiple women. The Jack the Ripper killings were often taken advantage of by cruel men who would send hoax letters as well to their partners pretending to be the Ripper, which is just insane.
That's sick. It's absolutely depraved, and it just shows at the time that they, let's be honest, like he was used as a form of intimidation against women, no matter if he was an actual threat to them or not.
Oh, definitely. Like, just it just spiraled into this. Yeah, it was crazy.
What I'd say is that surely that couldn't have been that common in the occurrence.
I don't know. I mean, for it to be like recorded as that, it must have happened a few times for it to still be something that is mentioned when you talk about the case today.
Yeah, of course, it's absolutely like abysmal that this is actually something that happened. You know what I mean? It's something that you'd think was made up. Yeah, it's that like serious and bizarre.
No, definitely.
What I'd say is, of course, the idea that it was misogyny that was the reason why he did all this is an interesting one, and I think it's true in a lot of ways, but we could also say that it's possible that the Ripper killed prostitutes because it was convenient. You know, because they were the ones that were considered a convenient target in society because they were considered as criminals.
Yeah, I mean, they were very just obviously didn't have a lot of people to lean on if, like, they weren't married, for example. That was their only source of income, and in that time, it was very much like you had to be married to a man to have income. They would also be out at night alone in, like, secluded places because it was, like, that's where they would do their work.
Yeah.
So it just seemed like, you also could then look at the fact that they were, like, victims of opportunity, I guess. Like, very just, like, easy targets.
Yeah, of course, and I think that as well there's something important was that they were considered like sinners by this really religious society.
Yeah.
That wanted to kind of demonise them.
No, definitely.
Yeah. What I'd say is, while we can't be 100% sure of either of these being the big motivation, it's highly likely that the reason for the murders is one, if not both of these, because they both do fit together. It's not mutually like exclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, you can't be 100% sure of the motivation or also who did it.
Yeah.
Like, it's very just, it will still be a mystery that's unsolved.
What I'd say to conclude is that's the Whodunnit podcast. That's our, Whodunnit. I can't believe me. That's the Whodunnit podcast. Leave any sort of theories in the comment section, and we'll be sure to dedicate a bit of time in our next episode to going through these.
Definitely.
And maybe seeing if you crack the case. Who knows?
Yeah.
Please like and subscribe to in any platform that you're on watching this. I would appreciate it greatly. Have a good day.
Thank you.